Nobody showed you how to do it. Not the job, not the relationship, not the thing you built that eventually worked. Nobody sat down with you before it started and said, here is what to expect. Here is how it works. Here is what you do when it falls apart. You figured it out. Not with a guide, not with a system, not with someone checking in to make sure you are on track. You figured it out the way your generation figured everything out, by doing it wrong first, by doing it alone, by doing it again. And somewhere along the way, somebody decided that was a problem. The word they use now is mentorship. It is in every career guide, every leadership program, every piece of advice given to people entering the workforce today. Find the mentor, get a coach, build your support network before you need it. The assumption underneath all of it is that humans require guidance from an established expert in order to develop competence. That without someone showing you the way, you will take wrong turns you could have avoided. There is research that challenges this. I want to tell you what it says. Because here is what the science of skill acquisition has actually found. The most durable competence, the kind that holds under pressure, that generalizes across situations, that does not collapse when the circumstances change, is built through a specific process. The process has a name: errorful learning. It is the acquisition of skill through repeated failure, through the correction that failure demands, through the development of an internal standard against which your own performance is measured. It is, in other words, the exact process your generation went through. What mentorship does, what it is genuinely good at, is shortening the path. It removes certain dead ends. It warns you about specific hazards. It is efficient. And efficiency has a cost that is rarely named. The cost is this: when someone removes the dead ends for you, you never develop the capacity to find your own way out of one. When someone warns you about the hazards, you never develop the instinct that recognizes a hazard you were not warned about. The map given to you by a mentor is accurate for the terrain they knew. It is not a map for terrain that has never been walked. Your generation had no map. Think about what that meant in practice. You started a job and nobody told you what the politics were. You had to read the room. You had to watch who listened to who was actually making decisions, who the difficult people were, and how they needed to be handled. You developed an acute sensitivity to the unspoken dynamics of organizations, not because someone taught you to look for them, but because looking for them was the only way to survive. You started a relationship and nobody sat you down and explained what a healthy one looked like in practice. The model you had was whatever you watched growing up. And for many of you, that model was complicated or absent, or the kind you had decided not to replicate. So you built your understanding of what you wanted and what you would not accept from direct experience, from things that went wrong, from the specific texture of getting it wrong and knowing it. You built a career, or rebuilt one, or rebuilt it again, without a roadmap. Significant portions of the economic infrastructure that was supposed to support your working life dissolved while you were standing on it. Industries closed, companies folded, certainties turned out not to be certain, and you adapted. Not smoothly, not without cost, but you adapted, because you had been adapting your whole life. Here is what the research says is happening when a person does this. The neuroscience of autonomous skill development, the study of what happens in the brain when a person acquires competence without external scaffolding, shows something consistent. The cognitive load required to function without a guide produces a specific kind of neurological development. The brain built what researchers call error monitoring circuits, networks dedicated to detecting discrepancy between intended and actual outcomes. These circuits become, over time, extraordinarily sensitive. They do not just detect when something has gone wrong, they begin to detect when something is about to go wrong, before the error has fully occurred, before the situation has fully deteriorated. This is what you experience as instinct. You have been in a meeting where something was not yet visibly wrong and you knew. You have been in a negotiation where the other party was not yet showing their cards and you could read them. You have been in a situation where the official story was coherent, but something underneath it was not. and you felt it before you could explain it. This is not intuition in the mystical sense. This is the error monitoring system of a brain that was built without a safety net, detecting patterns it has encountered in some form before, flagging the discrepancy before it becomes a crisis. Nobody gave you this. You built it. The way you build any capacity of this kind, by being in situations where you needed it and having to develop it in real time. The research on self-directed learners, people who acquire competence primarily through autonomous experience rather than structured guidance, shows something else that matters. They are significantly more adaptable. When the context changes, when the rules shift, when what worked last year stops working, the self-directed learner adjusts faster because they are not dependent on the framework given to them by someone else. They built their framework themselves. They know how it was constructed. They can take it apart and rebuild it. This is the thing about mentorship that the current conversation rarely says. It creates dependency. Not always, not inevitably. But the person who learns because someone showed them the way has a relationship with that knowledge that is different from the person who found it themselves. The found knowledge is more theirs. It fits the specific shape of how that person thinks. It was earned through the process of being wrong about it first. Your generation was wrong about a lot of things first, and then you were right. Not because someone corrected you, because the situation corrected you, and you paid attention and you adjusted and you tried again. That is not a gap in your development. That is the development. I want to say one more thing before I finish. There is a version of this story that is just about resilience, about how hard things made you tough, about how difficulty produced strength. That version is true, but it is incomplete, because the research shows something more specific than toughness. It shows that the autonomous development of competence produces not just the capacity to endure, but the capacity to teach yourself. The self-directed learner does not just survive without a mentor. They develop the ability to be their own mentor, to evaluate their own performance honestly, to identify what is working and what is not without requiring external validation, to set a standard and hold themselves to it. This is the rarest professional skill that exists. It cannot be given. It cannot be trained in a classroom. It develops only through years of needing it and having to find it yourself. And you have it. You built it the only way it can be built, without anyone showing you how. There is a version of competence that looks like confidence to the outside world. It is calm under pressure. It is the ability to walk into a situation with no precedent and begin working. It is the specific quality of someone who does not need to be told what to do because they have spent a lifetime figuring out what to do. You have seen it in yourself. In the moment before a crisis when you went quiet and started thinking. In the meeting where everyone else was looking for someone to take charge and you were already 3 steps ahead. In the situation that was genuinely new, that nobody had a playbook for, and you found a way through it anyway. That quality did not come from a book. It did not come from a program. It did not come from a mentor who sat you down at the beginning of your career and told you how things worked. It came from doing it without any of that, for decades, in a world that did not provide a roadmap and expected you to draw your own. Here's something the current mentorship conversation gets wrong. It assumes the mentor is always the more complete person, the person who has arrived, the person who can look back down the path and guide those who have not yet walked it. But the path your generation walked is not the path the current generation is walking. The world changed beneath your feet as you were walking it, and you adapted without stopping. The resilience that built is not transferable through instruction. It is not something that can be explained in a meeting or conveyed in a framework. What can be conveyed, what your generation carries that the mentor generation is still developing, is the thing underneath the skill, the tolerance for not knowing. The ability to hold uncertainty without requiring it to resolve. The willingness to try something that might not work and remain functional while you find out. The knowledge, earned through decades of having no other option, that hard things are survivable before they become clear. That is not what a mentor gives you. That is what the absence of one builds. And the world is full of people right now who can execute the plan but freeze when there is no plan. who can follow a well-lit path but become paralyzed when the lights go out, who have access to more information, more guidance, more structured support than any previous generation, and are still struggling with the specific task your generation performed automatically, functioning in conditions of genuine uncertainty. You learned to function in genuine uncertainty because you had no other option. You did not get to wait for the map. You had to make one. That is not nostalgia for difficulty. That is an accurate description of something rare that you built, slowly, without knowing you were building it, across the length of an entire working life. There is something else the research shows that I think your generation deserves to hear. The development of error monitoring circuits, the internal system that detects when something is off before it has fully gone wrong, does not just apply to professional situations. It applies to people. It applies to relationships. It applies to the specific human skill of reading a room, reading a conversation, reading the gap between what someone is saying and what they actually mean. Your generation developed this acutely, not because you were naturally more perceptive, because you grew up in environments that required perception. You read the adults in your house before they spoke, because you needed to know what kind of evening it was going to be. You read your peers before you approached them, because social survival depended on accuracy. You read workplaces and institutions and situations before you committed to them, because you had learned early that the official version of how things work and the actual version are not always the same thing. This is emotional intelligence before anyone called it that, and it was not taught. It was developed through the specific pressure of needing it without anyone offering a framework for it. The current conversation about emotional intelligence treats it as something that can be learned through training. And there is evidence that certain component skills can be improved through deliberate practice. But the research on people who score highest on measures of social and emotional perception, the ability to accurately read others, to detect inauthenticity, to navigate complex interpersonal dynamics, consistently shows that this capacity is built through early and sustained exposure to complexity, not through instruction, through the necessity of figuring it out. You were exposed to complexity early. Some of it was difficulty you would not have chosen. Some of it produced things in you that you have spent years working through. But part of what it produced, the part that is rarely acknowledged, is a level of social and emotional perception that took decades to build and cannot be replicated in a training room. Think about what you know about people that you cannot fully explain. You can tell within minutes of meeting someone whether they are trustworthy. You can feel the specific quality of a dynamic before you can name what is wrong with it. You can sit in a meeting and know which voices actually matter and which ones are performance. You can tell the difference between someone who is managing their image and someone who is genuinely present. This is not cynicism, this is calibration, built across a lifetime of paying close attention because nobody gave you the answer key. The mentor generation has access to frameworks for all of this. There are assessments and workshops and structured programs designed to develop interpersonal competence. And some of those programs produce real results. But the knowledge they transmit is, by definition, the knowledge of the person who designed them. It maps the terrain that person knew. It does not map the terrain that has never been walked. Your generation walks terrain that has never been fully walked by teaching the terrain as it was walked. That is a different kind of knowing, and it is rarer than the world currently recognizes. So the next time someone implies your career lacks structure, or your development lacked guidance, or your path was less coherent than it should have been, remember what that path built. Remember the skill underneath the skill, the self-direction that cannot be given, the earned capacity to be your own standard, your own correction, your own guide. Nobody showed you how to do it, and that is exactly why you can. I am Arthur, and I will see you in the next one.